She placed the paper on the table slowly, deliberately, the way a card player lays down a royal flush when everyone at the table thinks they're bluffing. Her billionaire husband stared at the medical report, her negative HIV test, and his face turned the color of wet cement. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No words came out, because for the first time in 9 years of marriage, Victor Langford had absolutely nothing to say. See, he had flown across the Atlantic Ocean, 7 hours in a private jet, rehearsing the speech he was going to give her. He had practiced every accusation, polished every lie. He came home carrying a positive HIV diagnosis and a suitcase full of rage, ready to blame his wife for everything, ready to call her unfaithful, ready to call her reckless, ready to file divorce papers that would paint her as the villain and leave her with nothing. But he forgot one critical detail. Before she was his wife, before the mansion, before the ocean views, before the candlelit dinners and charity galas, Mara Ashford was a forensic accountant, a woman who spent years hunting financial criminals, a woman who could follow a paper trail through a maze blindfolded. And when her husband pointed his finger at her and said, "You did this to me," she didn't cry, she didn't crumble, she turned that skill on him. And what she uncovered, it didn't just end their marriage, it exposed a double life so elaborate, so calculated, so breathtakingly cruel, that by the time she was finished, the billionaire who thought he was untouchable was the one begging for mercy. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? Not by a stranger, by someone you loved, someone you trusted with your whole heart, someone you would have walked through fire for? Then you know the feeling that tore through this woman's chest when her husband looked her in the eyes and said, "You gave me HIV." But here's what makes this story different from anything you've ever heard. She didn't just prove her innocence. She proved his guilt. Every lie, every secret, every hidden dollar and whispered promise to another woman. She found it all. Stay with me through every chapter of this story, beautiful family, because what she uncovers will leave you speechless. And at the very end, I'm going to share the exact precautions and steps you or someone you love should take if you ever, God forbid, face a situation like this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Love Chronicles with Mr. Incredible, where every story we tell doesn't just entertain, it transforms. It teaches. It heals. It reminds you of who you are and what you deserve. Before we go any further, I want to speak a blessing over every single person watching this right now. May the Almighty surround you with strength that no accusation can shake, peace that no betrayal can steal, and clarity that no liar can cloud. May every woman watching this know, deep in her bones, that her worth is not determined by someone else's failures. May every man watching this be reminded that real strength is not in dominance, but in honesty. May your homes be filled with trust that is earned, not demanded. May your hearts be protected by wisdom, your minds guarded by discernment, and your futures guided by a light that no darkness can extinguish. I pray that every tear you've cried becomes a lesson, every wound becomes a testimony, and every storm you've survived becomes the foundation for something beautiful. You are loved, you are valued, and you are never alone. My beautiful family, if you believe in the power of truth, if you stand with those who refuse to be silenced, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. If you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this one will change the way you see the world. And drop a comment right now. Just write, "Truth always wins." Let me see your love, because this story is going to need every bit of it. Now, let's begin. The ocean had never sounded so angry. Mara Ashford stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Monterey cliffside estate, watching the Pacific throw itself against the rocks below with a violence that felt personal. The water churned white and furious, crashing and retreating, as if the sea itself was trying to warn her about what was coming. Behind her, the kitchen smelled like heaven. Rosemary and slow-roasted lamb, garlic butter melting into freshly baked bread. His favorite Bordeaux was already breathing in the crystal decanter she'd received as a wedding gift from his mother. 2 place settings on the dining table, the good china, the cloth napkins, the candles she'd lit 20 minutes ago so the wax would soften into that warm glow he always said made the room feel like home. She'd spent 3 hours on this meal. 3 hours of chopping and seasoning and adjusting temperatures because 2 weeks ago, during a phone call from London, Victor had said something that stuck with her. "I miss your cooking, Mara. Nobody makes me feel at home the way you do." That sentence had lived inside her chest like a small flame. It was the kind of thing he used to say all the time, in the early years, when he still came home at reasonable hours, and they'd eat dinner together and talk about everything and nothing until the candles burned down to stubs. Somewhere in the last few years, those evenings had become rare. His company had expanded. The travel increased. The phone calls got shorter, but she held on to moments like that, little proof that underneath the billionaire and the board meetings and the relentless ambition, her husband was still in there. Still hers. 9 years of marriage. 9 years of building something she believed was unshakable. She heard the helicopter before she saw it. The blades cut through the evening air with an aggression that didn't match a homecoming. Usually Victor texted before landing, a simple message, sometimes just a heart emoji, sometimes 20 minutes out. Tonight, nothing. The helicopter descended fast, almost reckless, and the engine cut with a sharpness that made her stomach tighten. Car door from the hangar. Slam. Front door of the estate. Crash. Footsteps across the marble foyer. Not walking. Charging. These were not the sounds of a man coming home. These were the sounds of a man coming to destroy something. Victor appeared in the kitchen archway, and Mara's hand froze over the stove. He looked like he'd been in a fight, not with a person, but with himself. His London suit, charcoal, bespoke, the kind that costs more than most people's cars, was wrinkled as if he'd slept in it for days. His silver-streaked hair, always immaculately groomed for investors and cameras, stuck out at angles that spoke of hands raking through it obsessively. Sweat glistened across his forehead, despite the cool coastal air. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. But it was his eyes that stopped her world. Eyes she had loved for nearly a decade. Eyes that had found her across a crowded gallery opening and chosen her, out of every woman in the room. Those eyes were now filled with something she had never seen directed at her in 9 years. Accusation, raw, unfiltered, bordering on hatred. Who have you been sleeping with? The words detonated in the kitchen like a bomb. The warmth of the room, the rosemary, the candlelight, the jazz she'd put on softly, all of it vanished, replaced by something cold and sharp and suffocating. What? Mara's voice came out small, confused, like someone who'd been woken from a deep sleep by a scream. Victor crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and slammed a leather portfolio onto the granite island. The wine decanter shuddered. A candle toppled sideways, its flame drowning in its own pooling wax. The bread basket skidded. The careful, loving arrangement she'd spent the evening building was scattered in seconds. Don't perform for me, Mara. Not tonight. His voice was stripped of everything she recognized. No warmth, no humor, no tenderness. Just raw, jagged fury. Not after what I just found out. Victor, you're scaring me. What is happening? What are you talking about? He yanked open the leather portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Medical letterhead. Clinical language. Laboratory results. He held it up like a weapon. I went to my physician in London. Routine checkup. Blood panels. Stress markers. Standard pre-acquisition screening. His voice cracked, and she saw his chin tremble for just a moment before he forced it back into stone. The results came back yesterday morning. He paused. She watched him swallow, watched his eyes glass over with something that might have been terror if it weren't buried so deep beneath rage. I'm HIV positive. The kitchen tilted. Mara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not literally, but in that way where your brain refuses to process what your ears just received. HIV. 3 letters that rewrote everything. That took the warm, safe, candlelit evening and turned it into something from a nightmare. Victor, that can't be right. There must be a mistake. I haven't been with anyone else. His voice exploded, bouncing off the kitchen walls. 9 years, Mara. Every business trip, every late night, every conference where women practically threw themselves at me. I came home. To you. Always to you. So did I, she whispered. I've never been with anyone. Then explain this. He shoved the medical report toward her so forcefully the paper crumpled against her chest. Explain how this virus got into my body if you're the only person I've ever been with. Mara looked down at the paper. The clinical codes, the word positive printed in a font that felt like it was screaming at her. Her hands began to shake. Maybe it was a contaminated needle, she managed. A medical procedure, a blood test gone wrong. There are other ways this can... My doctor already eliminated every other possibility. Victor moved closer, and she could smell the adrenaline on him. Sharp, chemical, animal. No surgery, no transfusions, no needle exposure. The only probable transmission route, his exact words, was sexual contact. He leaned in, and his voice dropped to something low and dangerous. "And you are my only sexual contact." She could see it now. Not just rage, but something he'd built during the flight. A narrative. A prosecution. He hadn't just been blindsided by a diagnosis. He'd spent 7 hours at 40,000 feet constructing a case against her. "The yoga instructor," he said, and the way he said it made her stomach drop. "That new one you're always raving about. The art class every Tuesday night. The wellness retreat in Sedona last month while I was in Tokyo. The new clothes. The weight you've lost." He counted each item on his fingers, like evidence presented to a jury. "You've built yourself quite a little schedule, haven't you? Plenty of windows for someone to slip through." Each accusation was a blade, precise, deliberate, designed to cut. And the worst part was how he'd taken the innocent pieces of her life, the hobbies she'd picked up because he was gone 20 days out of every month, the clothes she'd bought because she'd been taking better care of herself, the retreat her sister had gifted her for her birthday, and twisted them into proof of betrayal. "Those are hobbies, Victor. I do those things because you're never here and I need something beyond these walls." How convenient. Silence. The jazz still played softly. Something smooth and warm that now felt obscene against the wreckage of the evening. The toppled candle had left a trail of hardened wax across the granite that looked absurdly like a tear track. And then, from somewhere deeper than fear, deeper than shock, from some bedrock of truth that could not be fractured, Mara heard her own voice. Steady, clear, absolutely certain. "I'll take a test, tomorrow morning, first thing. I'll get a full panel, HIV, everything. And when it comes back negative, Victor, and it will come back negative, you are going to owe me the truth about who you've really been with." Something happened to his face. It was fast, a flicker, a flash, barely a heartbeat long. But Mara caught it the way you catch lightning from the corner of your eye. It wasn't anger. It wasn't righteousness. It was fear, pure, involuntary, unmistakable fear. And just like that, in the space between 1 second and the next, everything Mara believed about her marriage shifted. The ground didn't just crack. It opened. "Fine," Victor said, his voice hardening again, the mask sliding back into place. "Get tested, and when you can't hide behind a negative result, we'll see what story you tell then." He grabbed the decanter of Bordeaux, the wine she'd chosen carefully, the wine that was supposed to make tonight feel like a homecoming, and walked out of the kitchen. His footsteps echoed down the hallway. She heard the study door close with a sound like a coffin lid settling into place. Mara stood alone in the kitchen she had spent hours preparing. The lamb was burning. She could smell the rosemary turning bitter, the meat drying out, the dinner she'd made with love becoming something ruined and acrid. The scattered medical papers lay across the counter. The wax had hardened into shapes that would take a chisel to remove. And the jazz kept playing, softly, warmly, stupidly cheerful, as if nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. Everything. She didn't follow him. For the first time in 9 years, Mara made no move to soothe, to fix, to bridge the gap between them. She stood at the granite island, gripping its edges until her knuckles turned white, and she let herself feel everything. The shock, the humiliation, the nauseating vertigo of being accused of the unthinkable by the person who was supposed to know her best. Then she turned off the oven, blew out the remaining candles, and pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled so violently she mistyped the clinic name 3 times before the search results appeared. She found one 3 towns over, far enough that she wouldn't risk running into anyone from Victor's social circle, and booked the earliest morning appointment available. Then she stood in the dark kitchen, phone in hand, and thought about the flicker she'd seen on his face. That flash of fear. Not the fear of a man who'd just received a devastating diagnosis. Something different. The fear of a man who hadn't expected his wife to push back, who had anticipated tears and apologies and guilt, and instead got a woman who said, "When my test comes back clean, you explain." That fear changed everything. It was a crack in the wall he'd built, and through that crack, something cold and clarifying poured in. Mara opened their shared cloud account, the one they used for family photos, travel documents, insurance policies, the one Victor almost certainly forgot she had access to because he'd set it up years ago when they still shared everything without hesitation. She navigated to his devices and found his tablet's photo stream. The images loaded slowly on her screen, and each one was a small explosion. Victor at a rooftop bar she didn't recognize, his arm around a silhouette that wasn't hers. The angle was intimate, familiar, the kind of closeness that doesn't happen between colleagues. Victor on a beach she'd never seen, not the beaches they'd visited together in Positano or Maui, but somewhere tropical and unfamiliar, laughing into a camera held by invisible hands. Victor in a hotel room, sheets tangled behind him, and draped across his shoulders, the monogrammed robe she'd given him for their 7th anniversary, the one he'd told her he'd lost during a layover in Dubai. Hotel must have taken it with the laundry, he'd said, and she'd believed him because why wouldn't she? And in photo after photo, always at the edge of the frame, partially visible, never fully shown but always there, a woman's hand, slender fingers, manicured nails, and on the ring finger, a piece of jewelry that burned itself into Mara's memory, an amber stone set in twisted gold. She set the phone down on the counter, carefully, the way you set down something that might detonate if you move too fast. The tears that had been building didn't come. Instead, something colder settled into her chest, something sharper, not grief, not yet. Grief was a luxury for later. Right now, what she needed was evidence. Mara pulled out her laptop, sat down at the kitchen table, the table still set for a dinner that would never happen, and began downloading everything. Screenshots of the cloud photos, credit card statements from their joint financial portal, phone records from their shared family plan, his travel calendar cross-referenced against his actual location data. She worked for hours, methodically, precisely. The forensic accountant who'd spent years tracing financial fraud was now tracing the fraud in her own marriage, and the trail wasn't even hidden well. Victor's arrogance had made him sloppy. He'd never imagined she'd look. At 2 a.m, she gathered a pillow and blanket from the linen closet, walked to the guest room at the far end of the hall, and locked the door behind her. She lay in the darkness with her phone clutched against her chest like a weapon. Through the walls she could hear nothing, no movement from the study, no footsteps. Victor had either passed out or was strategizing his next move. Mara didn't sleep, not a single minute. She lay perfectly still and watched the ceiling slowly lighten as dawn crept across the Pacific, and she thought about who she was going to become when the sun fully rose. Because the woman who had set that dinner table last night, the trusting wife, the faithful partner, the woman who hummed along to jazz while preparing rosemary lamb for a man she adored, that woman was already gone. She had died somewhere between the first accusation and the amber ring. What was left was something harder, clearer, more dangerous. Tomorrow she would get the blood test that would prove her innocence, and then she would start asking questions that Victor Langford was not prepared to answer. The clinic was housed in a converted Victorian painted sage green, as if the color could neutralize the terror that walked through its doors every day. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and fear, barely masked by a lavender diffuser humming in the corner. Mara sat among strangers whose faces held the same tight anxiety she felt in her own jaw. A young man bouncing his knee, a woman staring at her phone without seeing it, an older couple holding, hands so tightly their knuckles were white, lives suspended between before and after, waiting for a result that would determine which world they'd inhabit next. The blood draw took 90 seconds. 2 vials, a cotton ball pressed to the crook of her arm. The nurse, kind, professional, trained to be gentle with people on the edge, told her results would take 48 hours. "Try not to worry," she said. "Try not to worry." As if worry were a faucet you could turn off, rather than a flood that drowned everything in its path. Mara drove away from the clinic and kept driving. She couldn't go home, not to the cliffside estate where Victor was probably awake by now, rehearsing new accusations or calling his lawyers. Instead, she found a bed and breakfast 40 minutes up the coast, a quiet place overlooking a lavender farm, and checked in with a small bag and her laptop. For the next 41 hours, Mara Ashford became a ghost, unreachable, invisible, and utterly focused. She told Victor she was staying with a friend. He didn't ask which one. Maybe he was too proud. Maybe he was too busy covering his own tracks. Either way, his silence confirmed what the cloud photos had already told her. He didn't care where she was. He cared about controlling the narrative. But narratives require facts, and Mara was about to collect all of them. She opened their financial management portal, the same system she'd helped Victor set up during the early years when she was still his partner in everything, before he decided she was just decoration, and began the kind of deep forensic dive she used to do for corporate clients. The irregularities were breathtaking in their arrogance. A secondary credit card she wasn't authorized on, linked to an account she'd never been told about. Charges at restaurants in cities that didn't appear on his official travel calendar. Milan when he'd told her Frankfurt. Lisbon when his secretary had confirmed Sao Paulo. A 4-night stay in Santorini during a week he'd claimed to be locked in negotiations in Zurich. Recurring monthly payments, significant sums, to a luxury apartment complex in Manhattan's West Village. Not a hotel. An apartment. Rent. Victor was paying someone's rent. Every single month. For over a year. Florist deliveries to an address that wasn't their home. Jewelry purchases, earrings, necklaces, a bracelet that Mara had never seen, never worn, never received. Restaurant reservations for 2 at intimate venues she'd never heard him mention. She cross-referenced the apartment address with public records and found the lease agreement. The tenant's name was Nadine Calloway. Mara typed the name into a search engine and held her breath. The results showed a woman in her early 30s. Art curator, graduate of the Sorbonne. A carefully curated Instagram presence filled with gallery openings, European travel, expensive restaurants, and designer clothes that seemed ambitious for someone on a curator's salary, unless someone else was funding the lifestyle. And there, in photograph after photograph, on Nadine Calloway's left hand, was a ring Mara would have recognized in her sleep. Amber, set in twisted gold. Mara closed the laptop, stared at the lavender fields outside the window until the purple rose blurred into watercolor. Then she opened it again and kept going. Because the woman she used to be might have stopped here, might have cried, might have called her sister, might have poured a glass of wine and tried to process. But that woman was gone, and the one who replaced her didn't stop until she had everything. When the clinic called 41 hours later, Mara was sitting cross-legged on the bed and breakfast's patchwork quilt, surrounded by printed financial statements annotated in red ink like a crime scene. "Mrs. Langford, your results are ready. Would you like to come in or—" "Tell me now, please." A breath on the other end. Then, "All panels are negative. HIV, hepatitis B and C, full STI screening. Everything is clear. You are completely healthy, Mrs. Langford." Mara closed her eyes. Exhaled so hard her vision spotted. She'd known. From the moment Victor threw those papers at her, she'd known. But knowing is a candle. Proof is the sun. "There's something important I want to share," the physician continued. "Based on your husband's reported timeline, when his symptoms began, when he tested positive, if you had been his source of infection, our medical team is confident you would almost certainly be presenting positive by now as well. The science does not support spousal transmission in your particular case." "Thank you," Mara whispered. "You have no idea how much those words mean." She hung up and sat perfectly still in the small, quiet room. Outside, bees drifted through the lavender in drowsy patterns. Sunlight fell across the quilt in warm golden bars. The world was beautiful and ordinary and utterly unchanged, even though hers had been remade entirely. She picked up the phone that held proof of her innocence and her husband's elaborate, calculated 14-month betrayal, and she began to plan her next move. She found Nadine Calloway at a gallery opening on a Thursday evening, tracked her through Instagram stories, arrived uninvited, and waited beside a sculpture of tangled bronze figures near the back of the room. Nadine drifted through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who lived in these spaces, smiling at collectors, adjusting a frame's lighting, touching the arm of a patron with careful familiarity. She was beautiful. Mara could see that objectively, the way you observe a painting. Highlighted hair, thoughtful style, a warmth in her face that didn't match the homewrecker narrative Mara had been writing in her head for the past 2 days. When Nadine came close enough, Mara spoke. "You don't know me, but we share something." A pause. Actually, Nadine's face cycled through emotions like weather, confusion first, then recognition, then a devastation so complete it answered every question before a single one was asked. She didn't run. She didn't deny. She simply closed her eyes for a long moment, then led Mara through a side door to a stone courtyard where autumn leaves scattered across limestone like discarded confessions. They sat on a bench beside a small fountain. The water murmured between them, filling the silence while both women searched for where to begin. Nadine spoke first. "He told me you were estranged." Her voice was barely audible. Her hands trembled around the gallery catalog she was still holding. "Living on opposite coasts, waiting for prenuptial complications to be untangled before the divorce could finalize. And you believed him." "I questioned him. Multiple times. I asked if it was really over between you." Nadine's jaw tightened. "He showed me text messages. What he said were your text messages. Conversations where you were agreeing to separate amicably. He fabricated entire threads, screenshots with your name, your photo, your number. Whole conversations that never happened. The depth of the deception hit Mara like vertigo. He hadn't just lied. He'd manufactured evidence, created a false reality so detailed, so convincing, that a reasonable person would have no cause to doubt it. How long? Mara asked, though she already knew. 14 months. The number settled into her chest like a stone dropped into still water. 14 months. Over a year. While she'd been setting tables and booking anniversary dinners and sleeping alone in an ocean view bedroom she designed to feel like sanctuary, Victor had been constructing an alternate universe, one where he was the sympathetic hero caught in an unhappy marriage, and Nadine was his fresh start. He told me he loved me, Nadine continued, and the tears came now. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. Made plans, talked about children. He was specific, names he liked, schools he'd researched, neighborhoods in London and New York where we'd raise them. I thought I was building a future with someone real. When did you find out about your diagnosis? Nadine's hands stopped trembling. They went completely still, the way a person's body goes still when they're about to say something that costs them everything. 3 months ago, a previous partner, someone I'd been with before Victor, contacted me. He'd tested positive, and he had the decency to tell everyone he'd been with. She paused. I went to the clinic within the hour. And you told Victor? Immediately. I called him shaking, terrified, barely able to breathe. I needed support from the man who said he loved me, the man who'd talked about baby names and school districts and growing old together. Nadine's voice fractured. Do you know what he did? He disappeared, like I never existed. Changed his phone number, had his assistant, not even him, send me a legal letter warning me against any further contact, threatened restraining orders. No concern for whether I was dying. No question about whether he might be infected. No acknowledgement of 14 months of intimacy, of promises, of everything we'd built. Nadine looked at Mara directly now, and her eyes were red and swollen and absolutely honest. He erased me, as if I were a file he could drag into the trash. And then he went home to you and accused you of infecting him. He stood in our kitchen, Mara said quietly, surrounded by the dinner. I'd spent 3 hours making for him and called me unfaithful. Built an entire case using my yoga classes and art workshops as evidence. Had divorce papers drawn up listing my infidelity as grounds. Nadine's face crumpled. Oh God. Oh my God. They sat together while the fountain whispered and the gallery hummed with conversation on the other side of the wall. Two women who, by every script Victor had written, were supposed to be enemies. Instead, they were witnesses to the same crime. He talked about you sometimes, Nadine said, after a long silence. Called you remarkable, said you deserved someone who could truly be present for you. I thought it was wistful divorce talk, a good man acknowledging that a marriage had simply run its course. She wiped her eyes. Now I realize it was the only honest thing he ever said to me. You did deserve better, and so did I. Mara reached across the bench and took Nadine's hand. Held it for a moment, brief, human, powerful. Two strangers bound by the wreckage of one man's monstrous selfishness, offering each other the only comfort available, belief. How are you doing now? Mara asked. With the diagnosis? Scared, every day. But I started treatment immediately. The doctor says with proper medication I can live a completely normal life. It's manageable now. Not like it used to be. She managed a small, fragile smile. I joined a support group. My family has been incredible. I'm figuring it out. Good. I'm glad you have people. They exchanged a few more words, careful, sad, strangely tender, and then they parted ways. Mara watched Nadine walk to her car, shoulders still curved inward under the weight of everything that had happened to her. A woman who'd believed in love and been weaponized by it. Mara sat alone in the courtyard for a long time after Nadine left. Leaves drifted down from the trees and settled on the limestone around her like quiet witnesses. Her phone buzzed. A text from Victor. Please come home. We need to discuss our future. Our future. As if they still had one. As if trust could be unburned. Mara deleted the text without responding, started the car, and drove toward the coast. The city blurred past in a river of lights. Everyone moving forward while her life felt suspended between who she had been and who she was becoming. But even in the suspension, something was crystallizing. Not forgiveness. Not grief. Clarity. She knew exactly what she needed to do next. Family, I need to pause right here. If this story is hitting you, if you feel the weight of what this woman has been carrying, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now and tell me, what would you do if you were in Mara's shoes? Would you confront him? Walk away quietly? Burn it all down? I want to hear from you. And listen, if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's been blamed for something they didn't do, someone who's been made to feel small by a person who should have been their protector, share this video with them right now. Send it in a text. Post it on your story. You never know whose life a story like this might change. Because what happens next? When Mara walks back into that house with her evidence? Family. Victor Langford has absolutely no idea what's about to hit him. Let's continue. Victor was waiting in the great room when Mara returned to the estate. He'd showered, changed into casual linen, relaxed, approachable, deliberately non-threatening, his reasonable conversation outfit. She recognized the costume the way a detective recognizes a disguise. He'd positioned himself in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Pacific stretching behind him like a personal backdrop, a man standing before his empire, ready to negotiate. Where have you been? His tone was measured now, calibrated. The volcanic rage from 3 nights ago had been replaced by something more strategic, the smooth, controlled voice he used in boardrooms to close deals worth hundreds of millions. Getting tested, Mara said. She set her bag on the console table by the door. Like you demanded. And she crossed the room without hurrying, pulled the printed medical report from her bag, and placed it in his hands with the calm, deliberate precision of a chess player making the move that ends the game. Read it. She watched his eyes scan the document. She studied his face the way she used to study financial ledgers, reading the numbers beneath the numbers, the truth beneath the surface. Relief came first, quick, involuntary, a loosening around his eyes that he couldn't control. She was healthy. His wife didn't have HIV. Then confusion, the briefest knitting of his brow as the implications began their slow, terrible cascade. Then the dawn. She watched it rise across his face like a sunrise nobody wanted to see. If she was negative, completely, medically, unambiguously negative, then she hadn't infected him, which meant someone else had, which meant every accusation he'd thrown at her in this house was a lie built on top of another lie. Victor set the paper down with exaggerated care, the way you handle something explosive. This is good news, Mara. His voice brightened with manufactured hope. You're healthy. That's what matters. We can focus on my treatment now and move forward. Together. Move forward, she repeated. She let the words hang in the air between them, turning slowly, letting him hear how hollow they sounded. Without discussing how you actually contracted HIV, these things can happen in ways we don't always. I met Nadine. 2 words. The name landed in the vaulted room like a gunshot. Victor's composure didn't crack. It shattered. She could see the pieces falling away from his face in real time, the practiced calm, the boardroom poise, the carefully constructed expression of concerned husband, all of it collapsing to reveal the desperate, cornered animal beneath. She's unstable, he said, and the speed of his response told her he'd rehearsed this. A woman I met briefly at a professional function who developed an obsession. She's been making things up. 14 months, Victor. Silence. I have the financial records. Mara opened her laptop on the coffee table and turned the screen toward him. The apartment you've been leasing in the West Village, $11,400 a month, paid from an account you never told me about. Would you like to see the lease? She clicked to the next tab. Jewelry purchases. 3 necklaces, 2 pairs of earrings, a bracelet, none of which I ever received. Total, $47,000. Next tab. Restaurant reservations. Intimate tables for 2 at establishments in Milan, London, Lisbon, and New York, on dates that don't match your official travel calendar. Next tab. Flight manifests showing you in cities you never mentioned to me. Next tab. Phone records. Hundreds of calls and text messages to a single number. Late-night conversations lasting hours. Next tab. And these, the fabricated text message screenshots you showed Nadine. Conversations you created to make her believe I'd agreed to a separation. My name, my photo, words I never wrote. She let him look. Let the screens glow between them like evidence projected in a courtroom. Each tab was a nail. Each document was a brick in the wall of proof she'd built with the same methodical precision she'd once used to dismantle corporate fraud. I was a forensic accountant before I was your wife, Victor. Her voice was quiet but carried the force of a closing vault. You married someone who reads spreadsheets the way other people read novels. Did you really think I wouldn't look? Victor stood abruptly, moved to the window, ran both hands through his hair. She could see him cycling through strategies the same way he cycled through negotiation tactics when a deal went sideways. Strategy 1, minimization. It was a mistake, he said, turning back. A moment of weakness that went on longer than it should have. But it's over. I ended it months ago. You ended it because Nadine told you she was HIV positive and you panicked. That's not remorse, Victor, that's self-preservation. Strategy 2, the sympathy play. His face crumpled, on cue, she noted, and his voice dropped to something broken and vulnerable. I'm sick, Mara. I have a disease I'll carry for the rest of my life. I can't do this alone. I'm terrified. Please don't abandon me when I need you most. You needed me 3 months ago, when Nadine told you she was positive, and you knew you might be infected. You needed to tell me the truth so I could make informed decisions about my own body. Instead, you said nothing. You continued sleeping beside me. You risked my life because facing the truth would have meant facing yourself. Strategy 3, blame shifting. I was lonely. His voice rose, taking on an edge. Do you know what it's like running a company this size? The pressure, the expectations, the weight of it. I needed someone who made me feel alive. I was right here, Victor, setting your table, keeping your home, waiting for you every single night. Strategy 4, the reveal. Maybe if you'd been more interested in my world, he snapped, the mask slipping further. More engaged with my work, more supportive of my ambitions, more... He stopped. But the words were already in the room, hanging in the air like smoke. Mara looked at him. Truly looked. And she saw with devastating clarity the man she'd actually been married to, not the charming partner she'd imagined, but someone who genuinely believed his betrayal was her fault, who had spent 9 years accepting her love while building a case for why it wasn't enough. There it is, she said quietly. The real Victor Langford, not the apologetic husband begging for another chance. The man who actually believes his infidelity was somehow my failure, that I drove you to it by not being, what, exciting enough? Young enough? Grateful enough? I didn't mean... Yes, you did. You meant every word. And that's the most honest thing you've said to me in years. Mara reached into her bag and pulled out a second set of documents, the ones she'd found in his study during the 2 days he'd been drunk and passed out. Let's talk about these. She laid them on the coffee table beside the laptop. Divorce papers, drafted by his attorney, filed under grounds of spousal infidelity, her infidelity, pre-prepared, ready to submit. You had these drawn up before you even confronted me, Mara said. Your lawyer was on standby. The financial terms are... Interesting. I keep nothing. No share of the business, no claim to the properties, a modest settlement that would expire in 2 years, and a non-disclosure agreement preventing me from discussing the terms publicly. She looked up at him. His face had gone the color of old ash. You weren't just going to leave me, Victor. You were going to bury me, file on grounds of my infidelity, blame me for the HIV, destroy my reputation before I could defend myself, and walk away with everything intact. Your money, your company, your public image, while I became the unfaithful wife who gave her billionaire husband a disease. Victor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. My lawyers advised me to protect. Your lawyers advised you to strike first, before I discovered your affair, before I could claim my legal share, before the truth came out and made you the villain instead of me. Mara picked up the divorce papers and tore them in half, then quarters. The pieces fluttered to the marble floor like dead leaves. Here's what you didn't account for, Victor. She pulled a business card from her bag and set it on the table. I've retained Patricia Whitfield. The name landed like a physical blow. She saw him flinch, actually flinch, because Patricia Whitfield was the most feared divorce attorney on the West Coast. The woman who dismantled 3 billionaires' fortunes in the past decade and built a reputation so formidable that her name alone changed the math of any negotiation. She's reviewed everything, Mara continued. The financial structures, the offshore holdings in the Caymans and Singapore, the investment properties held through shell corporations, the trust accounts that aren't quite as invisible as you think. Victor's face was bloodless now. You wouldn't. I won't need to, if you're reasonable. But understand something clearly, Victor. Mara stood. She was not tall. She was not physically imposing. But in this moment, standing in the wreckage of his lies, surrounded by torn papers and glowing screens, she was the most powerful person in the room. The woman who sat in this house for 9 years, trusting you, defending you, choosing you every single day you were gone, That woman no longer exists. You killed her. The night you stood in our kitchen and tried to make me the villain of your story." She gathered her laptop, her evidence, her bag. "But the forensic accountant who knows where every dollar is hidden, who helped you structure the very accounts you're now trying to protect." She looked him dead in the eyes. "She is very much alive. Victor made one last play." The tears came, and maybe they were real, maybe they weren't, and the fact that she couldn't tell the difference anymore was perhaps the saddest part of all. "Please, Mara. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, complete transparency. I'll sign over whatever you want. Just don't leave me. Not now. Not when I'm sick and scared and I don't know how to face this alone." Mara paused at the door, turned back, looked at the man she'd married, the man she'd loved with everything she had, and felt something move through her that was beyond anger, beyond grief. Something quiet and immense, like the tide going out. "I hope you get the treatment you need," she said. "I hope you're honest with your doctors, even if you couldn't be honest with me. I hope you find the courage to face what you've done, not for my sake, but for your own." She held his gaze. "But I will not stay married to a man who would rather destroy me than look in the mirror." She turned to leave, then stopped one final time. "The saddest part, Victor, I would have stayed through anything. Sickness, failure, financial ruin, anything. If you had come home that night and told me the truth, just the honest, ugly human truth, I would have held you. I would have cried with you. We would have faced it together because that's what I believed marriage meant." Her voice broke, just once, on the last word. "But you didn't want a partner. You wanted a scapegoat, and I refused to be anyone's sacrifice." She left him standing in the glass house he'd built on lies, surrounded by expensive things that couldn't comfort him and ocean views that couldn't cleanse what he'd done. The evening light fell across the marble floor in long golden bars, illuminating the torn divorce papers scattered like evidence at a crime scene. Behind her, she heard a sound she'd never heard from Victor Langford before. Sobbing. Real, uncontrollable, ugly sobbing. She didn't turn around. 3 weeks later, Mara stood at the edge of a different ocean. She'd rented a small cottage on a stretch of Northern California coast that tourists hadn't discovered yet. A quiet, weathered place with a porch that faced the sunrise and a kitchen just big enough for one. The divorce proceedings were underway. Patricia Whitfield was handling everything with the precision and ferocity her reputation promised. Victor's legal team had tried to counter, but the evidence was overwhelming, and they knew it. Mara let the lawyers fight. She had other work to do. She'd begun reaching out to former colleagues, people from her forensic accounting, days who'd always said, "Call us when you're ready to come back." For years she'd waved them off, content in her role as Victor's wife, believing that love was enough of a career. Now she realized that the most dangerous thing she'd done wasn't trusting Victor. It was abandoning the parts of herself that existed before him. A firm in San Francisco had offered her a consulting position, flexible hours, meaningful work, investigating financial fraud, protecting people who'd been deceived. The irony wasn't lost on her. She started therapy in the second week, not because she was broken. She was remarkably intact, all things considered, but because she wanted to understand. How had she missed the signs? What had she been willing not to see? And how could she build a life going forward on foundations that wouldn't crack? Her therapist said something during their third session that lodged in her chest like a seed. "You didn't fail at marriage, Mara. You excelled at trust. The failure was his, for not being worthy of it." One morning, standing on the cottage porch with coffee in her hands, she watched the sun rise over the Pacific, the same ocean that had crashed against the cliffs of the estate she'd shared with Victor. But here, the waves were different, gentler, steadier, arriving in rhythms that felt less like violence and more like breathing. The same water, a completely different conversation. Her phone buzzed. A message from Nadine. "Started a new treatment protocol this week. Feeling stronger. My support group is incredible. One of the women there has been positive for 15 years and runs marathons. She told me, this diagnosis is a chapter, not the whole book. Thought you'd appreciate that. Hope you're doing well. Nen." Mara smiled, a real smile, the first one that didn't hurt, and typed back, "A chapter, not the whole book. I love that. Keep going, Nadine. You're braver than you know." 2 women who were supposed to be enemies. 2 women who were supposed to tear each other apart over a man who deserved neither of them. Instead, they'd become something unexpected. Not friends exactly, but witnesses. Proof that betrayal doesn't have to divide. Sometimes it illuminates. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you introduces you to the best version of yourself. Mara set down her coffee and looked at the ocean. She didn't know yet who she would become, didn't know what the full architecture of her next life would look like, but she knew what it would be built on, and it wasn't a man's approval or a mansion's walls or the false security of someone else's wealth. It would be built on truth, on self-knowledge, on the quiet, unshakable certainty that she deserved a love that didn't require her to be small. The waves kept coming, steady, patient, relentless, just like her. Family, before I close this story, I made you a promise at the beginning. I told you I'd share the lessons and the precautions that could protect you or someone you love if, God forbid, you ever face a situation like this. So here they are, and I want you to hold on to every single one. Lesson 1. Never let anyone rewrite your truth. When Victor accused Mara, he wasn't seeking answers. He was constructing a defense. He needed her to be guilty so he wouldn't have to face his own reflection. But Mara didn't crumble under his accusations. She didn't accept a story that wasn't hers. She said, "I'll prove it," and she did. If someone you love ever tries to make you the villain in a story they wrote, don't argue with their narrative. Build your own, with evidence, with facts, with the unshakable knowledge of who you are. Lesson 2. Trust, but never abandon your awareness. Mara trusted Victor completely, and trust is beautiful. It's the foundation of every meaningful relationship. But trust without awareness is vulnerability without protection. You can love someone with your whole heart and maintain access to your financial records. You can believe in your marriage and stay connected to your own career, your own skills, your own identity. Love should add to who you are, never erase it. Lesson 3. The guilty often accuse first. This is one of the most important patterns to recognize. Victor didn't confess when he got his diagnosis. He attacked. He projected his betrayal onto the one person who'd been faithful. This is a psychological defense mechanism, and it happens more often than people realize. When someone accuses you loudly and aggressively without evidence, pay attention. Sometimes the finger that points outward is trying to draw your eyes away from the truth standing right behind it. Lesson 4. Your health is your responsibility. Get tested regularly, regardless of how stable your relationship feels. Don't wait for symptoms. Don't rely on assumptions. Mara's negative test didn't just prove her innocence, it protected her future. Knowledge is not a sign of distrust. It's a sign of self-respect. Lesson 5. Know your legal and financial rights. Mara's background as a forensic accountant saved her. But you don't need a finance degree to protect yourself. Understand your joint accounts. Know your assets. Have access to your own financial records. If you're married, know your rights regarding property, support, and disclosure. The time to learn these things is before you need them. Lesson 6. Modern HIV treatment has transformed outcomes. If you or someone you love receives a positive diagnosis, please know, this is not the death sentence it once was. With proper treatment and medication, people living with HIV can lead full, healthy, beautiful lives. The stigma around this diagnosis causes more suffering than the virus itself. Seek treatment immediately. Join support groups. Lean on your community. And never, ever let shame silence you. Lesson 7. Your worth is not determined by someone else's betrayal. Mara's innocence was never actually in question. Not to her. She knew who she was. She knew what she'd done and hadn't done. The test was never about proving her worth. It was about exposing his lies. And that distinction matters. You are not diminished by someone else's failure to love you properly. Their betrayal is a reflection of them, never of you. Carry these lessons with you, family. Share them with the people you love. Because the greatest protection in this world isn't money or power or status. It's truth. And truth, once you hold it, can never be taken from you. Mara Ashford drove north along the coastal highway with her windows down and the salt air tangling through her hair. The test results sat on the passenger seat, a single sheet of paper that had become a certificate of resurrection. Behind her, the cliffside estate grew smaller in the rearview mirror. The glass walls, the marble floors, the kitchen where she'd chopped rosemary and hummed along to jazz, believing she was building a life with someone who deserved her love. Ahead, the road curved into darkness, unfamiliar, unmarked, stretching toward a horizon she couldn't yet see. She didn't know who she would become on the other side of this. Didn't know what shape her life would take once the lawyers finished and the papers were signed, and the last traces of Victor Langford were scrubbed from her daily existence. But she knew what she would never again be. Silent, small, apologetic for someone else's sins. The ocean roared beside her, the same waves that had crashed against every shore she'd ever known, but different now. Not angry, not violent, just constant, steady, relentless. Like her. Sometimes, family, the cruelest betrayal isn't the lie itself. It's the moment someone you love, someone you would have given everything to, chooses to make you the villain rather than face the mirror. It's the moment they decide that destroying you is easier than confronting themselves. But here's what they never count on. The truth has its own gravity, and eventually, inevitably, everything falls toward it. Family, if this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel something deep in your chest, made you want to hold the people you love a little tighter tonight, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now, not because I'm asking, but because somewhere out there someone is sitting alone, being blamed for something they didn't do. Someone is being made to feel small by a person who should be their shelter. And when you like this video, when you share it, you help this story reach them. You might be the reason someone finds the strength to fight for their truth. Subscribe to Love Chronicles with Mr. Incredible and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a story. Every week I bring you narratives that don't just entertain, they heal. They teach. They remind you that you are worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions and trust that doesn't come with traps. Drop a comment below and tell me, what lesson from this story hit you the hardest? What would you say to Mara if she were sitting right in front of you? I read every single comment, and your words become part of this community, part of this family. Until next time, beautiful family, stay blessed, stay wise, and never be afraid of the truth. It will always set you free.